Hello and welcome into my exotic tier list for Season 20, Season of Defiance, Destiny 2 exotic weapons. This is specifically for Grandmaster Nightfalls. These are the exotics that I know and love and use in a ton of Grandmasters, so I thought I'd put them in a tier list, tell you why I use them, or why they're good, or when they could be used and when they can't be used, things like that. There's a ton of exotics in Destiny 2. I'm not going to go over all of them. These are basically my S tier, A tier, B tier, and C tier weapons. Anything below C tier I will not be discussing. And hey, maybe there's a weapon and a build that I'm unaware of that should be S or A tier, and I'm not talking about it. I would love to hear about it in the comments, so then I can go test it out for myself. So please, if I missed a weapon that you love that you think should be S or A tier, let me know, and I would love to go check it out. I'm going to start with the bottom and work my way up to S tier. So I'm going to start with my C tier. Here, this is a very build dependent tier. Most of the stuff in B tier or C tier is very build dependent, and that's why it's not S or A tier. S and A tier I have more reserved for. This is always good in Grandmaster Nightfalls for the most part. If somebody jumps in my team and they have one of these guns on in S tier, we're good to go. So for C tier, these are good weapons to use in Grandmaster Nightfall, and there's typically not going to be a better option in that category, and that's why they're still on the list. So here we go. First up in C tier, Crimson. This is very build dependent. I think Crimson is good on a Lucky Pants Hunter that is built completely into weapon damage. And if they can stay alive in a Grandmaster on a Solar Lucky Pants or maybe a Strand Lucky Pants build, then it's very, very good. However, if they cannot stay alive, it is very bad. It's kind of that glass cannon, high risk, high reward, high damage, very easy to die. But this season, with grenades that can cure you and more heals on Solar Hunter than ever before, it's better than ever. I would use this, and I have used this in Grandmasters this season. And the other weapon that goes right along with that is Malfeasance. I think this is a little bit better than Crimson. It has inherent unstoppable stuns, and I just love the feel of Malfeasance. Next up is Parasite. This is a heavy weapon that's very dependent on a Solar Surge. I think this is a very good weapon because it's super high burst, can clear a whole room with a couple shots, and does crazy damage, but it's also kind of difficult to aim, takes a bit of getting used to, and it does take up a heavy spot on an exotic, which I think some other exotics that would probably be better to use even in this much damage, but it is very good. When I do run it, I do feel like it is very powerful. Next up, I have Thunderlord. This season, without having an arc surge, it's maybe not quite as good, but there are some weeks where there's a Grandmaster with machine gun overcharge, and for those weeks with machine gun overcharge, Thunderlord is really good. Especially if you can get your whole team to start running Thunderlord, then just it starts to get crazy. Then we have Augur Scepter, also very build dependent. This is only good on Stasis Warlock or possibly Stasis Hunter, but on those builds it is very good for lockdown and can save your GM. Next up is Fighting Lion. This one was tricky to place because right now in this week's Grandmaster it is S tier because the boss is coded as a red bar, and this does ridiculous broken damage to red bar combatants. That is a bug that Bungie knows about and is trying to fix, so I don't see this being S tier for very much longer, and once it's not in that category of being broken, I think it's going to be completely off the list. So it's a strange weapon to place right now because this week it is S tier, but maybe next week it's gone. Next we have Trinity Ghoul. This is a wonderful weapon for ad clear, but also this season with minimal arc surges, we're not going to get that extra 25% buff like we will on some other weapons. So while it is super good at ad clear, it falls short in a lot of other areas, but it is probably one of the best weapons for ad clear in the game. Next up is Polaris Lance. This one just got buffed with the exotics doing the 20% more damage to red bars, but also it now scorches as well. It's a scout rifle, so it takes unstoppables out, but also it can continue stun the unstoppables with Scorch. It's a really good weapon for unstoppable champions and solar surges, but there probably are better options overall, but it is very good. Next is Graviton Lance. This is wonderful for barrier breaking and void surge. When it's those two things together, this can be a great weapon to use because it does high damage. It can help with ad clear with its burst. It's a very good weapon. Not so build dependent as some of these other ones. And then Touch of Malice. This is a really good weapon when it's taken, or when some of your teammates are running Wither Horde or Malfeasance, because it changes the enemies to act like taken. So then Wither Horde and Malfeasance and Osteostriga do more damage. So it's great for that, but you also probably only really want to run this on a Solar Warlock, something that can just get a ridiculous amount of healing because it will kill you if you shoot it too much. Next up, I have Skyburner's Oath. This is really, really good in one of the Grandmaster Nightfalls this season, the Proving Grounds, because it can shoot through the Cabal shields, and you can break the boss's shield without having to go inside of it. In that Grandmaster Nightfall, I would put it in A or S tier, but in all the rest, it's probably not going to get used, so that's why it's in C tier. Next up, I have Bastion. Bastion's one of the best unstoppable stunning weapons in the game because it can stun them so fast. If you really just need a reliable, unstoppable stun, Bastion's a good go-to, and it does high damage. Next up, and starting off the B tier, I have Quicksilver Storm. This is an auto rifle, so it can stun overloads. It's also doing crazy damage to red bars this season with the recent buffs, and it's overcharged most of the time, depending on your build, but also with the overload champion buster. So this is doing really high damage, and it's a great primary exotic to use. I haven't used it a ton this season, but in my testing, my limited testing, it performed really well. I am looking forward to using it a little bit more now that I've done a tiny bit of testing on it. Next up, we have Collective Obligation. This is great for Void builds, really for Void Hunter with the Gyre Falcon. It's incredible because it can spread volatile, it spreads the suppression, it can spread everything around really well, all the Void debuffs. So this is great for taking care of champions, for suppressing whole rooms full of stuff. So on Void weeks, on Void Surge weeks, it is really, really good, but it's also very build dependent because you have to be building around those Void debuffs to have it be worthwhile. Next up, I have Ariana's Vow. This is a great weapon all around for breaking barriers, and especially on Solar Surge weeks. It's made even better on Lucky Pants Hunters. It can do ridiculous amounts of damage on Lucky Pants Hunter, but even not on Lucky Pants Hunter, it is still a really good weapon for barrier breaking. If you need to use your kinetic slot for something else, then this is a great go-to for exotic barrier breaker. Speaking of exotic barrier breaking, next up I have Outbreak Perfected. This is a good weapon for breaking barriers and doing a lot of damage to a boss with a primary. The more you shoot it at bosses with Siva, the more damage it starts to do, and so it can be really good. It feels great to shoot. It's a great weapon all around. There are better barrier breaking weapons that'll break them faster and do more damage. So that's why it's in the B tier. Just it's not the best in class anymore. It used to be for sure. Now there's better options. So it's kind of come down from A or S tier down to B tier. Then next up we have Wave Splitter. This is a really good trace rifle, especially good on Void Surge weeks. It does a ton of damage, and the ammo economy is really good on it. I really like this weapon for ad clear. In Grandmasters, it's not quite as strong as everywhere else. That's why it's not S or A tier, but it is a really, really good weapon, especially on those Void Surge weeks. The one gripe I have with it is it's not really good at champion stunning or anything like that. That's why it's not higher. Starting off our A tier, we got Conditional Finality, which is from the new raid. It's an exotic that can drop from there. It does solar and stasis damage, and it will ignite, and it will slow, and it will freeze. So therefore it can take care of all three champion types. That's why it's so good. The reason why it's not S tier for me is that it's a shotgun, so you have to be close, and in Grandmasters it's not really a good idea to be up close to a champion, but it does take care of them really well. This is the start to our A tier, so this is a fantastic weapon to use in Grandmaster Nightfalls. Next up, we have the Vexcalibur, which is a really good defensive weapon to bring in case you're struggling to stay alive or just need a crazy shield or to give your teammates crazy shield. This does really well. The shield that you can get and just keep up with how you build your Vexcalibur. You can keep up your shield almost at all times. Makes it a super safe play for some of the deadliest content in the game. Next up, I have Sleeper Simulant. This does incredible burst damage. One of the only linear fusions that did not get a nerf this season. So it's still doing a lot of damage, and on Solar Surge weeks, it is hitting crazy hard. This is a great weapon to use, especially on the proving grounds. It can take out those tanks. It's a fantastic weapon. I really love running it. Next up, we have Xenophage. This is very similar to Sleeper Simulant because it does a lot of high damage, but also this does good ad clear because the ammo economy is really good. So if you need to just pull it out to take out a champion or take out, a yellow bar or something, not something that you wouldn't typically use heavy on, you can still get away with it using Xenophage. And it also does really good work to the proving ground tanks and things like that. The final weapon in our A tier is Leviathan's Breath. This bow got some huge buffs this season and is now hitting like a truck. It takes care of unstoppable champions, and especially on Void Surge weeks, it does ridiculous damage. And then to start our S tier, at the bottom of our S tier, we got Gallahorn. Gallahorn is wonderful for when your team is running rockets, but if you're the only one running a rocket and you're the only one running Gallahorn, it's not worth it. That's why it's the bottom of S tier, not the top, because this is dependent on your team to also run rockets. The rest of the weapons in S tier don't have any dependency on your build or your team. So this is really good for super high burst damage with rockets. It gives everybody Wolfpack rounds, especially on Solar Surge weeks or Rocket Overcharge weeks. Rocket Overcharge week is probably the best time to use a Gallahorn. Just the ridiculous amount of damage you can do with it is crazy. Then next up, I have Lemonarch, the void bow that inherently stuns overload champions. This is one of my favorite weapons to use in all of Destiny 2. It also does great ad clear because it sends out a poison burst all around the ad that you hit with a critical hit. So you don't have to get a kill with it to have it pop out that AoE poison. You just have to get a critical hit. And also that smoke or poison, whatever it is, can stun overloads. So just by having that in the air, you can get more stuns on overloads. And this is especially great on void builds like a Void Titan or a Void Hunter, even a Void Warlock. All void builds this will be great on. But even not on void builds, you can run this during a Void Surge week and it'll do really, really well. Next up, I have Arbalest. This has been a standard in Grandmaster Nightfalls for a long time. It's wonderful for breaking barrier shields and also just doing high damage to bosses and mini bosses, things like that. Things that take high crit damage like the tanks in Proving Grounds. Also shooting through shields because it's a barrier breaker. So shooting through the shield of the Glassway boss or stuff like that, it does a really wonderful job at that. Next up, I have Witherhoard. This has also just been a staple in Grandmaster Nightfalls for a long time. It does crazy AoE damage. The one thing that it doesn't have going for it this season is it doesn't do anything to champions. So that's why it's probably not the very top of S tier, but it is close. This on a Solar Warlock does especially well with Starfire Protocol. It can get your grenades back like crazy, and the damage is just ridiculous. We have 3 more S tier weapons remaining. You can probably guess them all. Remember, this is just my opinion, and I'd love to hear yours as well. Maybe I got some of this out of order that you think, but I would love to hear your order too. Next up, I have Wishender, which is a barrier-breaking bow. It also gets your super back pretty quick with how the damage works. It's probably the fastest at reliably breaking barriers just because you can hold back your shot and wait for that barrier to pop up. This does really high damage and it shoots through shields. So the Glassway boss, you can shoot through its shield and do really good damage to. Because of how the primary exotic damage works with your super, you get your super back faster than any other weapon using this. This is good almost any time. It's even good when there's not barriers, but it's especially good when there are. This is one of my favorite weapons to run. Next up, I have Osteostriga. This is a fantastic weapon, especially for overload champions, and you can also build around it and build into it and buff it up with necrotic grips and things like that, but you don't have to. It's great even without that. If you get a team with a couple of these on it, it's going to be an easy run. These things are great. They do incredible boss damage with primary ammo. You can get those stacks going. Right now, there's still the Vorpal bug where you can get stacks of this going and switch to a Vorpal weapon, and the stacks will keep proccing and keep popping, so you can do something like 8,000, 10,000 DPS from hiding behind a block with a Vorpal weapon out. So because of that, it just makes this even better. Without the Vorpal weapon, bug right now, I'd probably still have it in S tier. But with the Vorpal weapon bug, it is incredible. And then my final weapon, my favorite weapon in the game right now for Grandmaster Nightfalls, and this might be controversial, but this is my opinion, this is my favorite, is Revision 0. This weapon got crazy buffs. It got a 20% damage buff for being a primary exotic, but it also got 75% damage buff to its 2-shot burst, and those things stacked, so the damage buff it got was just insane. This thing does all the same stuff that Wishender does with shooting through barriers and popping barrier champions and shooting through like Glassway boss shields, things like that, but also you can swap it over to a crazy damage sniper rifle at any moment with primary ammo. You don't have to worry about ammo, and you get a sniper rifle. So with a little practice and getting used to that and knowing when to switch over to your sniper shots, it is so good. It is the top of my S tier in my Season 20, Season of Defiance, Destiny 2 exotic weapons tier list. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know what weapons I left out that you think should be up here. There's a whole bunch of exotics, and there's probably a build for each one that you can make it decent, but this is my opinion of C through S tier of exotic weapons for Grandmaster Nightfalls this season. Thanks for watching. Peace.